Mr. Speaker, my generation refuses to live in a shipping container.
Mr. Speaker, one of the policies the Prime Minister campaigned on was building modular housing. That is a way to get more homes built faster.
It's like hell on earth.
It's not normal for people to be living in tents outside in these situations.
These are the people that are suffering the most as a result of this housing crisis.
No.
I think we should face the crises of housing head on.
It's like advertising a product that you can't provide.
Increase the housing area, like there's tons of places that you could actually be building more housing.
This is someone's home, and you cannot disrupt this without having a proper place for people to go.
When you see an encampment, what you're really seeing is people's efforts to survive, literally to stay alive.
I mean, I think housing costs are another one. There was a study out just 10 days ago that has Toronto and Vancouver now by far the most unaffordable housing markets in North America.
Canada is worse than you think. Just a few years ago, Canada was celebrated as a model of prosperity, an open, stable, and thriving nation, a place where people dreamed of building a future. But today, something is unraveling.
To rent a house, which I don't have.
I'm fortunate that I bought in before the prices skyrocketed, really. I mean, there's no way I could own now.
Yeah, I live within the city. The reason being that right now for you to own a house in Toronto is close to impossible. You have to put the down payment of about $1 billion, to be honest, but...
The dream is cracking under pressure. A 2-bedroom apartment in Toronto now costs more than some homes in entire American towns. In Vancouver, even high-income earners can't afford a mortgage. And beyond housing, Canadians are facing soaring grocery bills, strained healthcare, overwhelmed schools, and deepening divisions on immigration. In this documentary, we take a hard look at how Canada, long seen as a beacon of tolerance and opportunity, has become a country in crisis. We go beyond headlines and sound bites. We investigate the hidden policies, the demographic pressures, and the political missteps that brought us here. We'll hear from real Canadians, students crammed in basements, immigrants caught in the crossfire, city officials grappling with infrastructure collapse, economists, historians, and the everyday voices that rarely make it to the front page. This is not a hit piece. It's a deep dive, a cinematic investigation into the fabric of modern Canada. Because before we can fix a broken system, we have to understand how it broke. So if you're watching this, take a second now to subscribe. It helps more people see this and gives us the fuel to keep going. Let's begin. Canada is facing a silent emergency, and it begins at home, or rather, the lack of one. Imagine this. You earn a full-time income, work hard every week, maybe 2 jobs. You're not reckless. You budget, save, and still, every month feels like survival. Not because of luxuries, but because of one basic human need: shelter. In cities like Toronto, a 2-bedroom apartment now costs over $3,300 per month. That's not for luxury condos with rooftop pools. We're talking about average apartments, sometimes old, sometimes cramped, and often with long waiting lists. Just 2 years ago, that same unit went for $2,400. That's a 37% increase in 2 years. No major city in Europe or the US has seen rent spike that fast across the board. And it's not just Toronto. Vancouver is worse. Calgary and Ottawa are catching up. From coast to coast, it's becoming clear. Housing in Canada is no longer a right. It's a privilege. How did we get here? Let's talk numbers. In Canada, the minimum wage ranges between $15 and $17 per hour, depending on the province. Let's average that to $16 per hour. For someone working full-time, say 40 hours per week, that's about $2,560 per month before taxes. Now take that $3,300 average rent for a basic apartment in Toronto. Just rent, not counting food, transport, or utilities. It's easy to see why many Canadians now spend over 50% of their income just keeping a roof over their head. Financial experts call this being housing cost burdened. But the reality on the ground feels more desperate. It feels like falling, like you're constantly a month away from homelessness. And for those living alone, single parents, or international students, it's worse. Shared rooms, basements with no windows, 10 strangers crammed into a single-family house. These aren't fringe cases anymore, they're a growing norm. Canada's housing story didn't begin this way. For much of the 20th century, Canada was known for its stability. Home ownership was part of the national identity. In the 1980s and 90s, the government even invested in social housing and co-op models to keep the market balanced. But around the early 2000s, things began to shift. The government began pulling back on affordable housing investment. Cities handed over zoning control to private developers. Real estate became a game of speculation, not just shelter, but a wealth-generating asset. Vancouver and Toronto became hotspots for foreign investors. Buying wasn't about living, it was about flipping, holding, parking money. As demand skyrocketed, supply remained sluggish. Municipal red tape slowed development. NIMBY, not in my backyard, movements blocked high-density housing in affluent areas. The result? A bottlenecked supply chain in a market flooded with buyers. And then came the population boom. Since Trudeau took office, immigration targets have steadily increased. Canada now accepts over 400,000 new permanent residents each year, in addition to hundreds of thousands of temporary workers and international students. Immigration is often framed as a solution to aging demographics, to labor shortages, but housing wasn't scaled in tandem. In 2023, Canada's population grew at the fastest rate in over 70 years. That same year, housing completions declined. There were more people, but fewer places to put them. This mismatch isn't the immigrants' fault, but they're often blamed, and they're the first to suffer. A viral story emerged about 25 international students sharing a basement in Brampton. The room had no ventilation, no fire escape, only one bathroom. This wasn't an isolated case. Local authorities admitted that similar setups were common, especially in Ontario and British Columbia. The deeper you dig into Canada's housing crisis, the clearer it becomes.
Yeah, we've seen increases like that across Canada over the past decade. Certainly since my time as mayor, we've seen a lot more movement here in Ottawa, and we've got great programs starting to work now. A housing accelerator program is partnering with cities to deliver. I'm here to leverage my history as a mayor. I know what works on the ground.
This isn't just about high demand, it's about controlled supply. In most major cities, including Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, the vast majority of land is zoned exclusively for single-family homes. That means it's illegal to build apartment buildings, townhouses, or even duplexes in these zones. So even when demand surges, even when prices skyrocket, developers can't build unless local governments rewrite zoning codes. But here's the problem. Those areas are often home to Canada's wealthiest and most politically active residents. These are neighborhoods with long driveways, manicured hedges, and deep pockets. They organize, they lobby, and they vote. And most of them don't want apartment buildings in their backyard. They say it's about preserving neighborhood character. But in practice, it locks working class and immigrant families out of central areas. It pushes them to the outskirts, where transit is poor and services are underdeveloped. This is what urban planners call exclusionary zoning. And it's choking the housing supply.
I wasn't getting the help I needed from the federal government when I was mayor. We're the provincial government of all stripes. We need, as the government in Ottawa, to be delivering and partnering with cities and provinces all together, and making sure we're building enough supply and that the federal government is focused on affordable housing and delivering that.
Let's talk about a city that did things differently. Vienna, Austria. A European capital where 60% of residents live in publicly subsidized housing. Not public housing, but a mix of affordable, beautiful, often architect-designed buildings available to everyone. Vienna's model is based on a long-term investment in housing as infrastructure. The city buys land, builds apartments, and caps rents, often below market rate. Developers compete for government tenders based on quality, not profit. And crucially, the city has legal tools to control speculation and prevent investors from hoarding units just to drive up prices. The result? Vienna has some of the most livable, affordable housing in the developed world. And residents have stable lives, free from the anxiety of annual rent hikes or sudden evictions. Meanwhile, in Canada, even the definition of affordable has become warped. Government programs call a unit affordable if it costs 80% of market rate. So if a two-bedroom is $3,300, the so-called affordable version is still $2,640. For most Canadians, that's still out of reach. At the heart of the Canadian housing crisis is a policy disconnect. The federal government sets immigration targets and housing goals, but the actual power to approve housing developments? That lies with provincial and municipal governments. So you have one hand saying, build more housing, and the other hand refusing building permits. Mayors blame premiers. Premiers blame the feds. The feds blame city councils. It's a bureaucratic game of musical chairs. And while the music plays, average Canadians are priced out of their own neighborhoods. In some cities, permits for new housing projects take over 2 years. Some developers walk away. Others simply raise the prices to justify the delays. And then there's the invisible player in all of this, private capital. Canada's housing market is one of the most financialized in the world. Pension funds, real estate trusts, foreign investors, they all own slices of our housing supply. For them, scarcity is profit. Let's be clear. Not all developers are villains. Some genuinely want to build more homes. But the system they operate in is built for delay, speculation, and exclusion. And while the debates go on in city halls, Canadians suffer in silence. The average renter in Canada now moves every 12 to 18 months, often due to eviction, renovation notices, or sudden rent hikes. A 2023 study found that housing instability is now the leading source of stress among Canadians aged 18 to 45. More than job loss, more than health. Home, the place that should be your refuge, has become a source of fear. And for immigrants, it's even more painful. Many arrive hopeful, full of dreams. But they find themselves in overpriced rentals, overworked, and underappreciated. Some sleep in their cars, others take on debt just to survive their first year. And in the background, resentment builds, from locals, from media narratives, and from within.
If you've made it this far, you probably care. You probably know someone, maybe you are someone, who's been impacted by this crisis. Sharing this documentary helps others understand what's really happening. So take a moment now, like the video, leave a comment below with your story, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing. We're just getting started.
In most places, housing is a place to live. In Canada, it's an investment strategy. Let's break that down. Today, more than 20% of home purchases in Canada are made by investors, not by families, not by first-time buyers. These are people or corporations buying property not to live in, but to generate returns. In some cities like Toronto, this number is even higher. In downtown condo towers, whole floors sit in the dark. No furniture, no residents. These are ghost units. Properties held empty, waiting for the market to rise. And rise it does. Because in a system built around scarcity, holding supply hostage increases value. This turns homes into financial instruments. They stop functioning as shelter and begin acting more like stocks, bought, flipped, and sold without regard for human need. And governments? They've let it happen. Canada's tax system encourages real estate speculation. Mortgage interest is tax-deductible for rental properties. Capital gains on principal residences are exempt. Property taxes are often lower than rent increases. All of it tilts the table in favor of those who already own, and punishes those who rent. But what happens when everyone wants in on the game? In recent years, more and more average Canadians started investing in real estate, not just second homes, but entire portfolios. Landlords with 5 or more units. Facebook groups teaching how to retire early through real estate. courses on Airbnb arbitrage. It was promoted as a path to wealth, especially in a country where wages are stagnating and everything else feels out of reach. But when everyone becomes a landlord, who's left to be the tenant? Vacancy rates plummet. Short-term rentals remove housing from the long-term market. And rents, pushed higher by competition, soar. It's a race to the top for some, and a fall through the cracks for others. According to recent data, over 1.3 million Canadian households spend more than 50% of their income on shelter. That's the tipping point economists use to define crisis. And for Indigenous people, recent immigrants, and racialized communities, the numbers are even worse. All of this exposes a contradiction at the heart of Canadian politics. We claim to believe in the free market. That supply and demand will naturally fix problems. Just build more, and prices will fall. But the truth is, the housing market isn't free. It's rigged. Municipal zoning prevents supply. Investor activity distorts demand. Government tax codes reward speculation. So when politicians say, let the market decide, what they're really saying is, let the system keep favoring the wealthy. Because even when governments build housing, they often do it through partnerships with private developers. These developers, whose goal is to turn profit, have little incentive to build for the poorest. So we get affordable luxury. We get studio apartments renting for $2,200 a month. We get housing starts, but not housing access. And when prices still rise, the solution offered is almost always the same. Loosen mortgage rules. Let people borrow more. Stretch their income even thinner. But that's not affordability, that's debt. Meanwhile, one group keeps profiting: banks. Canada's Big Five banks make billions each year from mortgage interest. They are some of the most profitable corporations in the country, and a major player in how housing is financed. These institutions often lobby against regulations that would cool the market. They warn of market collapse if too many rules are added. And governments, dependent on the housing market to sustain GDP growth, rarely push back. In fact, real estate and related industries now make up over 20% of Canada's GDP. So even if housing becomes unaffordable for most Canadians, the economy looks like it's doing great. That's the paradox. GDP is rising, but people are getting poorer. Rents are up, wages are flat, debt is climbing, homelessness is growing. And across the country, ordinary people are starting to ask the most dangerous question in politics. Who is the system really built for? For generations, Canadians believed in a simple dream. Work hard, get an education, buy a home, raise a family. It wasn't just folklore, it was the middle-class contract. You didn't need to be wealthy, you just needed to be stable. But now that promise is breaking down. And the first group to feel the collapse is the youngest. Millennials and Gen Z are earning degrees, holding jobs, starting careers. And yet, home ownership remains a fantasy. In 1976, 55% of Canadians under 35 owned a home. Today, it's less than 35%. Even with steady jobs, many young people can't save for a down payment. Rising rents eat away their earnings. And those who can borrow stretch themselves to the financial brink. It's not just about houses anymore. It's about identity. In a country where owning a home was once the definition of adulthood, being stuck as a renter creates a sense of personal failure. But it's not their fault. It's the system that changed. Nowhere is the crisis more visible than in student housing. Canada has become a top destination for international students. In fact, the country now hosts over 1 million international students, more than any other country per capita. These students bring billions into the economy. But there's a problem. No one built homes for them. Colleges and universities recruit aggressively abroad, promising a bright future. But when students arrive, they're left scrambling for housing. Dorms are full. Rentals are unaffordable. A viral news story revealed 25 international students living in a single basement in Brampton. No windows. One bathroom. No escape in case of fire. And this wasn't an anomaly. Officials admitted it was happening across the Greater Toronto area. Education agents take commission, landlords charge double rent, and students, far from home with no legal leverage, stay silent. It's a housing crisis, and it's also an ethics crisis. This is where the crisis becomes generational, because it's not just students, it's not just renters, it's middle-class families too. According to the Canadian Real Estate Association, the average home price in Canada is now over $700,000. In Vancouver and Toronto, that figure crosses $1 million. For a household to qualify for a mortgage, they need to make 2 to 3 times the median income. Think about that. Even dual-income households, teachers, nurses, tradespeople, can't qualify. So what happens? They rent longer, they postpone kids, they delay milestones, and they feel it. A recent study showed that over 60% of Canadians under 40 now believe they'll never own a home in their lifetime. Not just soon, ever. And in a country built on the promise of upward mobility, that's more than a housing issue. That's a psychological break. This is Generation Rent. But what makes this generation different is that they're no longer staying silent. Across Canada, youth-led housing groups are forming. Online forums expose rent gouging. TikTok accounts name and shame slumlords. It's a new kind of protest, one rooted in visibility. And they're asking difficult questions. Not just, where can I live? But, why was I sold a dream that no longer exists? Politicians respond with promises. More housing starts. More tax credits. More incentives. But rarely do those measures target the core of the crisis: ownership imbalance, investor dominance, and policy fragmentation. Young Canadians don't want pity, they want equity. And if they don't get it, they'll leave. In recent polls, 1 in 3 Canadians under 35 say they're considering leaving the country altogether, seeking better affordability abroad. This isn't just a brain drain, it's a dream drain.
Are you part of Generation Rent? Do you rent? Do you own? Tell us your story in the comments. Where you live, what you pay, how it feels. These stories matter, because when they're told, loudly and publicly, the system has to listen. And if you're finding this documentary valuable, hit subscribe. It keeps this work alive and keeps the conversation going.
For most of us, home is the place we return to. A safe space, a certainty. But for tens of thousands of Canadians, that certainty is gone. The numbers are staggering. Over 235,000 people experience homelessness in Canada every year. On any given night, more than 35,000 people sleep in shelters, on streets, or in their cars. But these numbers barely scratch the surface, because the system only counts who they can find. The invisible homeless, couch surfers, families in motels, women in abusive homes who can't leave, go uncounted. And the most visible are tent cities. In Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Halifax, tents line the sidewalks, fill parks, and occupy underpasses. Some cities have even installed spikes or rocks to prevent people from sleeping there. But no amount of hostility can hide the truth. Canada is one of the wealthiest countries on Earth. And yet, in this year, in the middle of winter, people are freezing to death outside because they have nowhere to go. So how did this happen? For years, homelessness in Canada was framed as a niche issue, something faced by a small, vulnerable population. But that's no longer true. The new homeless are gig workers, seniors, students, families with jobs. The number of employed Canadians living in vehicles or shelters has doubled in the last 5 years. Because when rent rises faster than wages, the math simply doesn't work. Take Vancouver. Minimum wage is $16.75. That's $2,680 per month before tax. But the average studio apartment is over $2,200, if you can even find one. Add groceries, transport, and any unexpected bill, and there's nothing left. So people fall behind. A missed payment becomes an eviction. One step down, and there's no safety net. Most Canadian cities don't have enough shelters. The ones that exist are full. And even if you do get a spot, many shelters don't allow couples, pets, or offer privacy. So many choose the street over the system. There's another layer to this story that's harder to talk about: mental health and addiction. For many on the streets, untreated trauma, from abuse, from war, from poverty, drives substance use. And once addicted, the system offers few paths back. Harm reduction programs like safe injection sites and housing first strategies have proven results. But they're underfunded and politically controversial. Some provinces, like Alberta and Ontario, are pushing more policing, not more beds. The result? A revolving door. People are moved from tents to shelters to ERs to jail and back to the street. Every year, more than 500 homeless Canadians die in this cycle. Many are under 40. These deaths rarely make the news, but each one is a policy failure. Because this isn't a crisis of individual choices, it's a crisis of systemic neglect. And for Indigenous communities, the numbers are even more devastating. Indigenous people make up just 5% of Canada's population, but account for over 35% of the homeless population. The reasons are complex: colonialism, land displacement, residential school trauma, underfunded reserves. But the result is simple: extreme housing precarity in both urban centers and rural areas. A 2023 report showed that over 80% of First Nations homes on reserves have serious deficiencies: mold, lack of heat, contaminated water. In Winnipeg, which has one of the highest Indigenous populations in Canada, entire tent cities are made up of displaced Indigenous families. Housing, in this context, is not just about economics. It's about sovereignty, about dignity, about whether this country truly wants to reconcile or just apologize.
Have you seen homelessness in your city, in your community? It's not just someone else's problem, it's a national one. If this chapter resonates with you, comment below with what you've witnessed. And please consider subscribing to help us tell stories that others won't.
Immigration is one of the founding pillars of Canada. This is a nation built by people who came from somewhere else, from Europe, Asia, the Caribbean, Africa, and Latin America. The very idea of Canada has long been defined by openness, diversity, and inclusion. But today, that narrative is being tested. In this year, immigration has become one of the most politically divisive issues in the country, not because of who is arriving, but because of how Canada prepared for their arrival. The core problem isn't immigration itself. It's that immigration was used to fix one crisis and ended up deepening another. Let's explain. In the years following the pandemic, Canada faced a labor crisis. Job vacancies were surging in construction, healthcare, agriculture, and tech. The population was aging fast. Birth rates were low. Immigration to many seemed like the obvious solution. And so, beginning in 2022, the government raised its targets. 465,000 new permanent residents in 2023, 485,000 in 2024, 500,000 in 2025. The intent was logical, the execution was not. While immigration surged, housing construction lagged far behind. In 2023, Canada experienced its fastest population growth in 70 years, but new housing starts declined. Cities were already overburdened. Schools were full. Transit was stretched. Emergency rooms were packed. There was no national plan to synchronize immigration with infrastructure. No requirement that provinces build faster. No federal funding strategy to expand services at scale. It was like adding more passengers to a boat without checking if it could float. And in the chaos, the debate got uglier. Real frustrations about housing, healthcare, and affordability, which were caused by years of underinvestment, started being blamed on newcomers. Immigrants were suddenly framed as the problem, and public opinion turned sharply. The numbers tell the story clearly. In 2022, just 27% of Canadians believed immigration levels were too high. In 2023, that number jumped to 51%. In 2024, it reached 58%. This shift is unprecedented in Canadian polling history. And it doesn't just represent frustration, it signals fear. Fear that the system is broken. Fear that newcomers are being prioritized over locals. Fear that cultural values are changing too fast. These narratives are being amplified by online influencers, populist politicians, and even some media outlets who equate immigration with decline. But blaming immigrants for a housing crisis caused by decades of policy neglect is like blaming firefighters for showing up late to a fire when no one built a fire station. Meanwhile, most immigrants were never the enemy. They were survivors. Survivors of war, of climate change, of economic collapse. They arrived with hope, only to enter a system that treated them like numbers on a chart. Many are overqualified, yet underemployed. Some live 6 to a room. Others send half their income back home. And still, they're blamed for stealing jobs, raising rents, and flooding classrooms. It's a dangerous cycle. As trust in institutions declines, so does empathy. And once empathy disappears, so does social cohesion. Immigration can still work. Canada needs population growth. It needs new workers. But it also needs planning, housing, healthcare, transit, schools. You can't grow a country without building it. And you can't keep using immigration as a solution if you never solve the root problems it's supposed to fix.
What do you think about immigration in Canada? Are we doing it right? Leave your thoughts in the comments, with respect and nuance. And if this video helped you see things differently, hit subscribe. We need more long-form voices in this conversation.
What if Canada became a nation of 100 million people? That's the question posed by one of the most ambitious and polarizing policy proposals in modern Canadian history. It's called the Century Initiative, and its goal is clear: triple Canada's population by the year 2100. Advocates say it's necessary, that Canada is aging too fast, growing too slow, and lacks the scale to compete globally. But critics say it's reckless. That tripling the population without first fixing housing, infrastructure, and services would plunge the country into chaos. So what is the Century Initiative, and who's behind it? It began as a think tank and advocacy group backed by influential business leaders, academics, and political strategists, some of whom advised Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Their logic is based on economics. More people equals more workers, more taxpayers, more innovation, more global influence. They argue that countries with large populations, like the US, Germany, and France, are more resilient, more productive, and more competitive. In their view, Canada must grow, or decline. But here's the problem: the math might work, but the people don't. Because in this year, Canadians are not asking for more people, they're asking for more solutions. And yet, the Century Initiative continues to influence federal immigration policy. Many of its leaders are connected to current or former cabinet officials. Some were campaign donors. Others wrote op-eds framing immigration as a moral and economic imperative. Their pitch is seductive. Grow now to avoid stagnation later. But what's missing from that pitch is housing, is transit, is healthcare, is a vision for how a country of 100 million people actually functions. Because if Canada is already struggling to house 40 million, how can it possibly support 100? It's not about whether immigration is good or bad, it's about scale. And whether that scale is supported by planning or left to collapse under its own ambition. Public reaction was swift and divided. Some saw the Century Initiative as visionary. Others saw it as elitist, disconnected, and dangerous. In 2023, a nationwide poll found that 68% of Canadians opposed the idea of tripling the population. Concerns included housing, culture, labor competition, language preservation, and environmental sustainability. Even immigration advocates expressed worry. Because when targets get too ambitious, systems collapse. And when systems collapse, it's the newcomers who suffer first. In July 2024, protesters rallied across the country, not against immigrants, but against the unrealistic scale of growth. Build first, grow later became a popular slogan. The federal government distanced itself from the Century Initiative, but many of its targets still match the plan's projections. And as elections approach, the tension is rising. Is Canada growing into the future, or speeding toward a breakdown? The idea of a 100 million Canada isn't inherently wrong. In fact, some version of that future might be inevitable, but futures must be built, not assumed. You can't import population without building hospitals, You can't target 500,000 immigrants a year without building 500,000 homes. You can't fill tech jobs without fixing credential recognition. And you can't ask the public to believe in a vision that doesn't include them. For Canada to grow, it must be grounded in reality. Not spreadsheets, not slogans, but roads, rooms, schools, beds, transit lines, jobs. The Century Initiative asks a good question. Who do we want to be in 2100? But that answer starts with a more urgent one. Who are we building for today?
What do you think about Canada's long-term population goals? Do you support the 100 million vision? Drop your thoughts below. If you're finding this video informative, hit like and subscribe. It's the best way to support deep dive content like this.
Here's the part of the housing crisis few people talk about, and even fewer understand. No one actually runs the system. The Canadian housing crisis isn't just a result of poor planning. It's a product of disconnected planning. In theory, housing is everyone's responsibility. The federal government sets immigration targets, provides funding, and runs national programs. Provinces control infrastructure, transit, and land use policy. Cities and municipalities approve zoning, permits, and developments. But in practice, it's no one's responsibility. Each level of government has its own priorities, timelines, and limitations, and they rarely coordinate. So while Ottawa announces 500,000 new permanent residents, a local city council blocks a 12-unit housing project because of neighborhood character. While provinces call for more tradespeople, they also delay transit infrastructure needed to serve denser populations. And cities, often underfunded, can't build or maintain the infrastructure needed for rapid growth. It's a broken machine, running at full speed. One city's mayor put it best. We are asked to accommodate tens of thousands of new people each year, but given no power to plan for them. The truth is, Canada has never had a centralized housing strategy that connects immigration, infrastructure, and urban planning in one coherent system. Instead, we have dozens of siloed programs operating in parallel. And the results are predictable. Projects take 2 to 5 years to get approved. New units are concentrated in luxury markets, not affordable housing. Transit expansion lags behind population growth. Local councils block density out of fear of traffic or school crowding. Even federal incentive programs like the Housing Accelerator Fund often get lost in translation by the time they reach the local level. The money is there, the land is often there. But the permission to build? That's where everything gets stuck. There's also a political cost to solving the crisis. Many of the places best suited for densification, walkable, transit-rich, centrally located neighborhoods, are also home to the most politically powerful homeowners. These residents vote, they donate, they show up to city meetings. And often, they resist change. They argue that apartments will lower property values, that renters bring crime, that increased density will overwhelm roads and schools. These arguments aren't just outdated, they're dangerous. Because they lock working families, immigrants, and young people out of the very communities that offer opportunity. The result? A growing divide. Between owners and renters. Between cities and suburbs. Between those who have a stake and those who just want a roof over their head. In the absence of leadership, these local pressures shape national outcomes. And the longer governments wait to act decisively, the worse the crisis becomes. There is a solution, but it requires courage. Canada must build a national housing framework that aligns all 3 levels of government. This doesn't mean federal overreach. It means coordinated vision. A plan where immigration goals are matched with infrastructure funding, where provinces are required to expand transit alongside growth, where cities are rewarded for approving dense, affordable housing. It means rethinking zoning codes written in the 1950s. It means confronting wealth hoarding through land banking and vacancy taxes. It means telling voters the hard truth. Housing justice might mean change in your neighborhood. But without that change, we will lose the Canada that promised opportunity for all. A house isn't just a structure, it's the foundation of society. And if the foundation crumbles, so does everything built on top of it. Have you seen housing projects blocked in your city? How long do approvals take? Tell us below. If this video is opening your eyes or confirming what you already knew, subscribe and share. This is how we build a smarter conversation. It began with hope. In 2015, Justin Trudeau swept into office on a wave of optimism. He was young, charismatic, and full of progressive promises. His campaign was built around fairness, making life more affordable, growing the middle class, restoring trust in government. And for a while, many Canadians believed him. On his first day as Prime Minister, Trudeau walked into a Montreal metro station, surrounded by cheering commuters and cameras. He took selfies. He smiled. He said all the right things. He promised real change. That promise still echoes, but for many, it now sounds hollow. Because nearly a decade later, the reality on the ground is very different. Rent is up. Grocery bills are up. Wages are stagnant. And housing, more unattainable than ever. Trudeau may not have caused the housing crisis, but today, he owns it. So what happened? For the first few years, Trudeau focused on progressive reforms, climate policy, gender equity, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. But housing was largely left to cities and provinces, despite mounting warnings. Between 2015 and 2019, the federal government's housing efforts were limited to modest programs and a few $1 billion in co-investments. The crisis didn't explode overnight. It simmered. Meanwhile, immigration targets kept rising, and no national housing strategy accompanied them. By 2021, prices were surging, supply was lagging, and the public began asking, where is the leadership? In 2022, Trudeau's government announced record-high immigration goals, without requiring matching construction goals from provinces. In 2023, his government unveiled the Housing Accelerator Fund, but rollout delays and red tape dulled its impact. And in 2024, public patience ran out. Then came the turning point. Sean Fraser. Fraser, formerly Minister of Immigration, was appointed Minister of Housing in 2023. The announcement was met with confusion. After all, Fraser was the architect of the very immigration surge that critics blamed for the housing overload. YouTube comments and news pundits piled on, "You can't fix a fire by hiring the arsonist." Fraser inherited an impossible job, but the optics were unforgiving. In cities like Brampton and Mississauga, basement overcrowding reached crisis levels. Mayors begged for support, tenants protested. And when Trudeau doubled down on defending his housing policy, public anger shifted from frustration to fury. By late 2024, his approval rating fell to 33%, the lowest of his political career. But even Trudeau's critics admit something deeper. The housing crisis didn't begin with him. Canada stopped investing in public housing in the 1990s. Foreign speculation surged in the 2000s. Municipal zoning laws have blocked density for decades. Trudeau didn't create this system, but he promised to change it, and failed to do so in time. Today, many of the most vulnerable Canadians, renters, students, newcomers, feel abandoned. Trudeau has responded with new language. We hear you. We're recalibrating. We're going to slow immigration to align with housing. But critics say it's too late. Because for many, this isn't just political anymore. It's personal. When your rent eats up half your paycheck, politics becomes pain. And right now, a growing number of Canadians blame the person at the top.
Do you think Trudeau handled the housing crisis well? Is this his burden or a system he couldn't control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. We're heading into the final part of this chapter.
This is bigger than rent, bigger than mortgages. Canada's housing crisis is not just an economic issue, it's a moral one. Because when a country as wealthy as Canada can no longer guarantee shelter to its people, something deeper is broken. What we're seeing is more than unaffordable housing. It's the unraveling of a promise. The promise that if you work hard, if you do your part, this country will give you a fair shot. For many Canadians, that promise no longer feels real, and that's where the true danger lies. Because when people stop believing that the system is fair, they stop believing in the system. This isn't just a housing story. It's a story about trust, about identity, about what kind of country Canada is becoming. Canada is at a crossroads. One path leads to hard truths and real change. It means building, not just homes, but systems. A system where immigration and housing align, where renters aren't punished for not owning, where cities can grow without choking, where development serves people, not just profit. The other path is the one we're on now. A future of deepening inequality, of rising resentment, of policy by crisis. We've seen where that road leads in other countries, and if Canada wants to avoid it, it has to act fast. Payday loan usage has increased by over 30% in the last 3 years. And the fastest growing segment of borrowers? Working professionals. Not because they're reckless, but because the paycheck no longer stretches. What makes debt especially dangerous is its silence. No one sees it. No one talks about it. Canadians don't march in the streets about debt. They just adjust. They skip meals, delay healthcare, borrow from parents. And for the millions in this invisible trap, shame becomes a second burden, because we live in a culture that tells people their value is based on their ability to earn and spend. And when they can't keep up, they blame themselves. But this isn't a personal failure. This is a structural reality, created by stagnant wages, soaring costs, and a financial system designed to lend first and worry later. We're not a nation of bad planners. Are you carrying debt? How are you managing? If you're comfortable, share in the comments, or support others who do. This is a space for honesty. No shame, just real stories. And if you haven't yet, like and subscribe. These stories deserve to be heard. You walk into the store with a list: milk, eggs, bread, a few fruits, maybe chicken. You walk out $120 poorer and still feel like you forgot something. For millions of Canadians, grocery shopping now feels like a punishment. Not because of poor planning or luxury tastes, but because the system is tilted. In this year, food inflation in Canada continues to outpace general inflation, with bread, meat, dairy, and vegetables showing the steepest increases. And while we hear explanations like supply chain issues or global instability, the truth goes deeper. Because while costs have gone up, so have profits. The top 3 grocery companies in Canada, Loblaw, Metro, and Empire, Sobeys, made record profits during the same period that food prices surged. Loblaw alone posted nearly $4 billion in profit last year, while millions turned to food banks. That's not inflation, that's strategy. This is what economists call greedflation. It happens when companies raise prices faster than their own costs, not because they have to, but because they can. In a market with limited competition, corporations don't have to fear losing customers. Canada's grocery industry is a textbook case of oligopoly. Just 5 companies control over 80% of all grocery retail. And because these giants also own the suppliers, warehouses, and transport systems, they control pricing at every level. A single increase at the supplier level is magnified at checkout. And when competitors aren't really competing, prices rise in sync. In 2023, Canada's Competition Bureau admitted that the food market lacks meaningful competition. That's not a bug in the system. That is the system. Meanwhile, the story on the ground is stark. Over 2 million Canadians now rely on food banks every month. And these aren't just unhoused or unemployed people. 1 in 5 users are children. 1 in 7 are seniors. 1 in 3 are full-time workers. Food insecurity is spreading across cities and provinces. And in Indigenous and northern communities, the situation is worse, with prices 2 to 4 times higher than urban averages. A box of cereal in Nunavut can cost $18. A bag of apples in northern Quebec, $12. And yet, political action remains limited. In 2023, Parliament called grocery CEOs to testify. They denied wrongdoing. The hearings made headlines, then quietly disappeared. Today, nothing substantial has changed. Canadians still pay more, and corporations still profit. And here's the hardest truth of all. Canadians don't just feel the pinch, they feel powerless. Grocery shopping has become a trauma loop. You walk in afraid. You do the math in your head. You leave wondering what you'll cut next time. This isn't just about profit. It's about policy. Government subsidies often support corporate agriculture, but not local farms. Nutrition programs in schools and shelters remain underfunded. And tax law allows grocery giants to buy back shares and pay dividends instead of lowering prices. The system was built to protect shareholders, not shoppers. And as long as prices keep rising faster than pay, the checkout line will remain a battlefield. What did your last grocery trip cost? Do you think corporate profit plays a role in food inflation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And hit subscribe. Because in the next part, we break down how the system was designed to keep you paying more. If the cost of living crisis feels unfair, that's because it is. But not just at the checkout or the gas station. The real imbalance is coded deep inside the system on who pays taxes, who receives subsidies, and who gets the benefit of being wealthy without being taxed like it. Canada's tax system looks progressive on paper, but in practice, it rewards ownership over work, wealth over wages. A minimum wage worker pays full income tax. A real estate investor gets capital gains tax breaks. A nurse reports every dollar she earns. A CEO routes income through dividends and corporate shells. This is how inequality becomes structural, not just through what people earn, but how they're taxed for it. Let's talk numbers. In this year, Canada's top earners still benefit from capital gains tax discounts. Only 50% of the gain is taxed. For example, if you make $100,000 selling stocks or real estate, you're only taxed on $50,000 of it. Meanwhile, a regular worker pays tax on every single dollar. And then there's the corporate subsidy system. Billions in tax breaks, credits, and incentives for businesses. Many of whom report record profits, lay off workers, or offshore operations. In 2023 alone, Canada spent over $30 billion in direct subsidies to fossil fuel, agribusiness, tech giants, and large corporations. Some of these programs are meant to protect jobs. Others claim to stimulate growth. But where's the public return? Where are the wage increases? The cost reductions? In many cases, all we get is a bigger gap. It gets worse when you zoom in on real estate. Property is one of the biggest drivers of wealth in Canada. But while homeowners get tax-free gains on their principal residence, renters get nothing. Investors deduct interest, maintenance, depreciation. Landlords can defer taxes through refinancing. And REITs, real estate investment trusts, operate like corporations but are taxed like mutual funds. Which means massive apartment portfolios can be traded and profited on, while tenants struggle with annual rent hikes. Even Airbnb hosts benefit. Many write off homes as business assets. This isn't just inequality, it's institutional bias, a system that favors those who already have property while penalizing those who don't. And then there are the loopholes. Tax avoidance is legal, tax evasion is not. But in practice, they often blur. Ultra-wealthy Canadians use shell companies, family trusts, offshore accounts, and dividend-splitting strategies to reduce their tax bills. According to a 2022 report, Canada loses $25 to $35 billion a year to tax avoidance and evasion, money that could fund housing, transit, or dental care. Meanwhile, CRA audits focus more on small businesses and low-income tax returns than on complex high-wealth structures. Why? Because it's easier and cheaper. But that choice sends a message. You can skip the line if you're rich enough to hire someone to find the exit. Do you think Canada's tax system is fair? Should capital gains be taxed like income? Drop your thoughts below. And subscribe to help push this message to more Canadians, especially those who don't see what's really going on behind the numbers. This is what anxiety sounds like. A child asking, "Why can't we buy milk?" A phone call from the bank that you don't want to answer. A parent scrolling job listings at 2 a.m., already employed, just not paid enough. These aren't isolated stories. They're daily life for millions of people. Because the cost of living crisis isn't just affecting wallets, it's impacting minds. And the stress is becoming a public health emergency. In this year, over 40% of Canadians say financial pressure is affecting their mental health. And for younger adults, the number is even higher, nearly 60% among those aged 18 to 34. People feel stuck, isolated, angry, and in a culture that equates success with wealth, the shame of struggling only deepens the damage. This is not about bad budgeting, it's about broken systems. Let's talk about burnout. Once used to describe workplace exhaustion, burnout now applies to life itself. Canadians are working harder than ever, but feeling worse. According to a 2024 study, nearly half of all workers report symptoms of burnout, physical fatigue, emotional detachment, and chronic anxiety. And the cause isn't just bad bosses or long hours. It's that no matter how hard people work, it's not enough to catch up. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, the belief that no action you take will improve your situation. Over time, that feeling chips away at identity, self-worth, even basic motivation. It's not laziness, it's psychological exhaustion from an economy built like a treadmill, with the incline always rising. And then there's the quiet crisis: suicide. In the past 5 years, suicide rates in Canada have crept upward. While not always directly tied to money, financial hardship is one of the leading stressors among people who attempt suicide. Among men aged 35 to 54, the group with the highest financial responsibilities, suicide remains one of the leading causes of death. Calls to crisis lines have spiked. Wait times for therapy have ballooned. But access to mental health care remains uneven. In many provinces, therapy isn't covered under public health plans. And for those who can't pay, the only option is often an emergency room. This is the human cost of economic stress. These are lives fraying at the edges, not because of trauma or illness, but because they simply can't afford to live. And yet, people keep going. Despite everything, Canadians keep showing up. They work, they hustle, they share what they can. But survival should not require heroism. It shouldn't take courage to pay rent. It shouldn't take endurance to buy groceries. And when a society normalizes stress, exhaustion, and quiet despair, it becomes harder to imagine anything else. But that imagination, that belief in a different, fairer future, is the first step to healing. Because this isn't just about saving money, it's about saving people. Have you felt the emotional weight of financial stress? You are not alone. Share your story. Speak your truth. Support someone else in the comments. And subscribe if you believe mental health belongs in every economic conversation. The numbers say we're doing great. Canada's GDP is up. The economy is resilient. Job numbers are strong. That's the language of government briefings, quarterly reports, and investor calls. But ask the average person on the street. They'll say it's harder than ever. So who's right? The truth is both realities exist, but they're measuring different things. GDP, gross domestic product, tracks total economic activity. But it doesn't tell you who benefits. You can have record GDP growth, while the average household gets poorer. Because when growth comes from population increases, debt-fueled spending, or inflated asset values, it can mask deep inequality. Welcome to the Great Disconnect. Let's break it down. Canada's population is growing faster than any other OECD country. That's partly due to ambitious immigration targets, which fuel labor force numbers and boost consumption. More people equals more transactions equals more GDP. But when you look at GDP per capita, that is economic output per person, the story changes. In 2023 and 2024, GDP per capita declined, which means that while the economy got bigger, the average Canadian got poorer. That's like saying the pie is growing, but your slice keeps shrinking. And unless growth translates into higher wages, better services, and more affordable living, it doesn't feel like growth at all. The same disconnect exists in jobs. Government reports show that employment remains high, but they don't always explain what kinds of jobs are being added. A surge in part-time, gig, and low-wage service work can boost employment stats, while leaving real people in financial limbo. And when job creation outpaces wage growth, the gap widens. So yes, the numbers might say we're doing well. But what those numbers fail to capture is how it feels to live inside the economy, how it feels to work full-time and still not get ahead, how it feels to see national growth while personal bills pile up. That feeling? It's not wrong. It's the product of a system where macroeconomic success doesn't translate to personal security. So what would real prosperity look like? It wouldn't just be about GDP. It would be about per capita well-being, housing access, real wages, food security, mental health. It would be about shared growth, not just corporate earnings. About a system where the good news at the top is felt at the bottom. And we're not there yet. Because until policy focuses on people, not just numbers, this disconnect will grow. And Canadians will keep asking the same painful question. If the country's doing so well, why am I struggling so hard? Have you felt this disconnect? Do the numbers about growth match your lived experience? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more voices breaking down what's really going on, subscribe and share. This matters. On the surface, Canada feels united. A rich, peaceful country. Universal healthcare, diversity. But beneath that surface, two very different realities are unfolding. In one Canada, people own homes they bought before the boom. They drive paid-off cars, they earn investment income, they have equity, and sleep. In the other Canada, people rent rooms with strangers, work gig shifts without benefits, check their bank accounts before every grocery trip. These two worlds exist on the same streets, often within a few blocks of each other. And the gap between them is growing. The story of Canada's cost of living crisis is also a story of who is protected and who is exposed. Let's start with geography. The cost of living in Canada varies wildly by location. In Toronto or Vancouver, a modest one-bedroom can cost more than $2,500 a month. In places like Halifax or Kelowna, prices are climbing fast. Meanwhile, in small towns across the prairies, housing may be cheaper, but wages are lower, jobs are fewer, and services are disappearing. There's no safe zone anymore. In the north, food is unaffordable. In the east, young people are leaving. In the west, renters are being squeezed out of their own communities. Urban or rural, it's not easy anywhere. But in some postcodes, it's becoming impossible. Then there's the generational divide. If you bought a home before 2005, you've likely seen your wealth skyrocket. But if you're under 40, you've probably faced a life of record rent, tuition, wage stagnation, and debt. Millennials and Gen Z are more educated than any generation before them, but less likely to own a home, build savings, or retire comfortably. And when they ask why the system feels broken, they're told to stop eating avocado toast. This isn't generational entitlement. It's a different economic reality. One shaped by globalization, asset inflation, and a housing market that has priced out an entire demographic. And we can't talk about inequality without talking about race. In Canada, economic outcomes are still heavily influenced by race and immigration status. Racialized Canadians earn less on average, face higher rates of unemployment, and are more likely to rent, even with equal qualifications. For recent immigrants, the first years in Canada are often marked by underemployment and housing precarity. Many arrive highly educated, and yet drive Ubers, clean offices, or work in kitchens. Meanwhile, Indigenous communities face the most severe housing shortages in the country, with some reserves lacking clean water, heat, or even permanent shelter. The cost of living crisis didn't invent this inequality, but it has made it harder to ignore. They did everything right. They went to school, they got jobs, they saved what they could, and still, it's not enough. These are the people falling through the cracks of Canada's economy, not because they're irresponsible, but because the floor beneath them is collapsing. Students, seniors, and workers, all facing different versions of the same truth. You can work hard and still struggle to survive. Let's start with students. In this year, the average undergraduate student pays over $7,000 per year in tuition, not including books, rent, or food. For international students, that figure can exceed $35,000. Add housing shortages, low-wage jobs, and rising prices, and students are living in cars, skipping meals, and lining up at campus food banks. Not to party, not to protest, just to get by. Then there are the seniors, the generation that built this country, worked 40 years, paid taxes, raised families, now watches their pensions erode under inflation. Old age security and CPP were designed for a different era, one where homeownership was common and costs were stable. But today, over 30% of Canadian seniors live in rental housing, and rent increases are outpacing fixed incomes. Grocery costs, prescription drugs, home heating. For many, every bill is a calculation. In cities like Vancouver, there are seniors sleeping in shelters. In rural Canada, many rely on food banks. They gave their best years to the country. And now, they're being left behind. Finally, we come to the new working poor. They are everywhere, in hospitals, restaurants, daycares, and delivery vans. They have jobs, sometimes two. And still, they live paycheck to paycheck. In many Canadian cities, minimum wage is no longer enough to rent a basic apartment. These workers pay taxes, support families, and fuel the economy, but they can't afford to rest. One missed shift can mean a missed rent payment. One car repair can erase their food budget. And the hardest part? They're told the problem is them. That if they just worked harder, they'd get ahead. But what happens when harder isn't enough? This isn't just an economic failure, it's a moral one. A society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable. And in Canada today, the most vulnerable are slipping. Not because of personal mistakes, but because they've been priced out of their own futures. From the classroom to the care home to the corner store, the same story repeats. People doing their best, and a system doing its worst. If we want to be better, we have to see them, and not just as numbers, but as neighbors, as workers, as family, as Canadians. Are you a student, a senior, or a full-time worker feeling the pressure? Share your story below, or support someone else who does. This isn't just a policy issue, it's personal. And if this story matters to you, like, share, and subscribe. We've talked about the symptoms, the rent, the bills, the burnout, the broken math. But now we have to ask something deeper. What is prosperity really? Is it GDP growth? Is it stock market performance? Is it owning property while others sleep in shelters? Or is it something else? What if prosperity meant security? Knowing that if you get sick, you'll still eat. That your kids can go to school without debt. That your work earns not just wages, but dignity. This is the choice Canada now faces. Keep growing a system that produces inequality, or rebuild one that distributes well-being. This won't be easy. It requires political courage. Not to chase poll numbers, but to build long-term systems that protect people. It means bold housing policy, where affordability isn't left to markets alone. It means taxing wealth fairly, not punishing labor while rewarding speculation. It means investing in universal mental health care, basic dental, childcare, and transit, not as luxuries but as essentials. And it means listening, not just to economists, but to teachers, cashiers, nurses, students, retirees, single parents. Because they know what's broken. And they know what's possible. But this isn't just about policy, it's about imagination. Because the system we have today was designed. That means it can be redesigned. What if we stopped asking, how can we afford it? And started asking, what kind of society do we want to build? What if success wasn't measured by what we accumulate, but by how many people we lift? What if prosperity meant everyone makes it home at night, fed, warm, and safe? That's not utopia. That's what it means to live in a wealthy country with a conscience. And that future is still possible, if we choose it. What does prosperity mean to you? How would you fix the cost of living crisis? Share your vision in the comments. And if you believe in honest people-first storytelling, like, subscribe, and and send this to someone